In the spring of 1881, a camera captured an image that should have been destroyed the moment it was developed. At first glance, it looked like a harmless studio portrait, a young Hungarian actor seated comfortably in an ornate chair, his expression calm, almost playful. Standing beside him, however, was someone who never should have been photographed in that position, King Ludwig II of Bavaria. To anyone outside the royal world, it might seem insignificant, but inside Europe's rigid hierarchy, the image was a scandal waiting to erupt. A monarch never stands while a subject sits. That reversal was more than a breach of etiquette. It was proof that the balance of power between them wasn't political, but personal. When copies of the photograph made their way back to Munich, Ludwig's ministers didn't need rumours or speculation anymore. They understood instantly what the image revealed. After nearly 2 decades of whispers and careful cover-ups, the king's most dangerous secret was visible to anyone with eyes to see. This wasn't just about improper behaviour. It was evidence that the king's private world, the secret nights, the companions hidden away in castles, the reason he had never married, was real. And in a monarchy already under financial strain and political pressure, that photograph became the spark his enemies had been waiting for. Within 5 years, Ludwig would be declared insane, imprisoned, and dead in a lake, all because of one forbidden picture. To understand why a single photograph could be deadly, you have to understand the man who stood in it. Ludwig II of Bavaria wasn't just another monarch. He was a dreamer trapped inside a crown, a man who built castles instead of armies, fantasies instead of policies. And like every dreamer forced to live in a brutal, practical world, he learned early that his desires were dangerous. The story begins in 1863, when 18-year-old Crown Prince Ludwig first locked eyes with Prince Paul von Thurn and Taxis, a dashing young aide-de-camp whose uniform glinted with golden buttons. Bavaria's court was full of handsome aristocrats, but Paul was different. Letters hidden in the royal archives reveal the intensity of what followed. "My heart beats only for you," Paul wrote. Ludwig replied with an even more startling confession. "You are the sun in my darkness. When you are away, I cannot eat or sleep." For months their secret meetings stretched late into the night. For the young prince, this wasn't a fling, it was revelation. But courts have eyes everywhere. Servants whisper. Ministers take notes. Within 6 months, rumours were spreading through Munich's beer halls that the uncrowned heir preferred the company of men over the princesses paraded before him. Ludwig's mother, Queen Marie, summoned Paul to a private audience. No records survive of what was said, but Paul vanished from Bavaria that very night, transferred to Prussia, gone forever. For Ludwig, the message was clear: love equaled loss, and the walls of the palace became his cage. When his father died suddenly in 1864, Ludwig became king at just 18. The crown weighed barely 4 pounds, but for him it might as well have been iron shackles, because kings were expected to marry, to produce heirs, to prove themselves in daylight. And daylight was Ludwig's enemy. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the young king began to change his schedule. First he missed morning councils, then he shifted state business to afternoons. By the 1870s, the transformation was complete. Ludwig II of Bavaria had reversed his entire life. He slept by day and ruled by night. His breakfast arrived at midnight, his lunch at 3 a.m. His dinners were held as the sun was rising, when the rest of Bavaria was heading to church. Why? Because in darkness Ludwig could finally breathe. The mask he wore in daylight, the perfect monarch, the dutiful son, the man expected to marry, could come off when the candles were lit. But he needed more than shadows. He needed spaces where reality itself could be bent. So he built them. Castles that looked like medieval fantasies, but inside were riddled with secret doors, hidden staircases, and private chambers. Neuschwanstein, the fairy tale fortress that would one day inspire Disney, wasn't a palace for government. It was a fortress for secrets. At Linderhof Palace, he constructed something even stranger, the Venus Grotto, an artificial cave complete with an underground lake, heated water, and the world's first private electric lighting system. Coloured bulbs transformed the grotto red for passion, blue for melancholy, green for jealousy. In the centre floated a golden boat shaped like a seashell, where Ludwig reclined with hand-picked companions while Wagner's music echoed through hidden speakers. To tourists today, it's a curiosity. To Ludwig, it was a sanctuary. A parallel kingdom had taken shape, one that existed only between sunset and dawn. In this world, Ludwig was free to surround himself with actors, musicians, and the young men who shared his secret desires. Servants were paid fortunes to keep silent. Ministers looked the other way, as long as the treasury didn't collapse. But all it took was one slip, one photograph, one moment when the forbidden world Ludwig built in darkness was dragged into the light. And that moment was about to arrive. In May 1881, Ludwig's carefully constructed Shadow Kingdom collapsed, not with a battle or a betrayal on the field, but with the click of a camera. The actor Joseph Kainz was just 23 when Ludwig first saw him perform on the Munich stage. By all accounts, he wasn't the finest actor in Germany, but he had something Ludwig couldn't resist: charisma, beauty, and the spark of youth Ludwig felt slipping away from himself. Within days of that performance, Kainz was summoned to the palace. Within weeks, he was travelling with the king as a companion. The relationship was passionate, obsessive, and above all, reckless. Unlike Paul von Thurn and Taxis, or the discreet stablemaster, Richard Hornig, Kainz wasn't a noble. He was a commoner, a performer, and therefore a danger. But Ludwig didn't care. After years of secrecy, he wanted to be seen. That was the mistake. On a trip to Switzerland, travelling under an alias, Ludwig allowed a photographer to take their portrait. Perhaps he thought no one in Munich would ever see it. Perhaps he believed the fantasy world he'd built could protect him from reality. Whatever the reason, that single photograph captured something impossible. Ludwig, the King of Bavaria, standing, and Joseph Kainz, a mere actor, seated like royalty. Protocol was absolute in 19th century Europe. A king never stood while a subject sat. The image alone was scandal enough, but the expressions made it fatal. Kainz looks directly into the lens, relaxed, confident, even slightly amused. Ludwig gazes not at the camera, but at Kainz. His eyes are fixed with a devotion too obvious to miss. Ministers who saw the image didn't need rumours anymore. They had proof. The photograph spread through Munich's political circles like wildfire. To the court, it wasn't just an embarrassing breach of etiquette, it was a revelation of everything they had tried to suppress for nearly 2 decades. Ludwig's refusal to marry, his nocturnal kingdom, the young men summoned to his castles. For his enemies, it was a weapon. Count Maximilian von Hohenstein, once Ludwig's confidant, moved swiftly. He began collecting testimony from dismissed servants, compiling receipts for extravagant gifts to actors, and worst of all, bribing a valet to steal pages from Ludwig's private diary. Those entries, full of longing for his companions, would later be used against him. But the photo remained the centerpiece, undeniable visual evidence that the king had crossed a line no monarch was allowed to cross. Still, scandal alone wasn't enough to depose him. Bavaria tolerated whispers as long as they stayed whispers. What Hohenstein and his allies needed was madness. If they could not destroy Ludwig with rumours, they would remove him with medicine. Enter Dr. Bernhard von Gudden, one of the most respected psychiatrists in Europe. Gudden had never met Ludwig, never examined him, never even spoken to him. Yet in March 1886, he signed a detailed report declaring the king hopelessly insane. The reasons? His reversed sleep schedule, his love of Wagner's operas, his extravagant castle building, and between the lines, his forbidden relationships. It was enough. On June 10th, 1886, Ludwig II was declared unfit to rule. His uncle was named regent. A commission of soldiers and doctors rode to Neuschwanstein in the dead of night to arrest him. The king who built castles of dreams, who lived in darkness to protect his secrets, was dragged into the daylight, and within 3 days he would be dead. June 13th, 1886, Lake Starnberg, Bavaria. The sun is setting when King Ludwig II, now a prisoner in his own kingdom, asks his doctor, Bernhard von Gudden, for a walk. Guards hesitate. Their orders are strict, but Gudden waves them away. The king is calm. He insists. We need no protection from a broken man. It is the last mistake either of them will ever make. Hours later, their bodies float in waist-deep water. The official report says Ludwig dragged his doctor into the lake, strangled him, then drowned himself. But the details don't add up. Ludwig was a strong swimmer. Witnesses from his youth recalled him cutting across lakes with powerful strokes. Yet when his corpse was pulled from the shallows, there was no water in his lungs. His watch had stopped at 6:54 p.m., while Gudden's stopped more than an hour later. The doctor's face bore scratches. His neck showed clear marks of strangulation. And then there was the fisherman. Jakob Liedl, the man who discovered the bodies, lived the rest of his life in comfort. He received mysterious payments large enough to buy property and eventually became mayor of his village. In private notes found after his death, Liedl wrote, "The king was escaping. I had a boat ready. As he waded toward me, I heard the shot. He fell into the water. I was told if I valued my family, I saw nothing but 2 drowned men. What really happened on the lake? Was Ludwig executed to silence him before he revealed the secrets of his midnight kingdom? Did he know too much about the nobles who shared in his forbidden pleasures? Or did the state simply decide that a king who loved too freely was too dangerous to live? The Bavarian government still keeps documents about that night sealed. Over a century later, the truth remains classified. And the cruelest irony? The castles Ludwig built as sanctuaries for his secrets, Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, Herrenchiemsee, today draw millions of tourists and generate tens of millions of euros each year. Bavaria now profits from the fantasies that once condemned him. They called him mad. They said he drowned. But perhaps Empress Elizabeth of Austria said it best in her diary. They killed him not because he was insane, but because he was free.